Ora, anzo kisi siede da, anzo karishe barelana, anzo lia, dunga, yoyagi, gyudi, ane chingazu, dunga siadige, gyudan kienle tene tukore, digi siede, gyudan kienle tene tukore. Tene zida, anzo lia, lu siede, anzo lu dela tene, dunga dan, gyue dunga siada, andilingores. Tene zada, anzo lu di, ane karele dunga dige, karete tukore sene, Leda nyomon palatine kigore sachi ya gyu jesulatine kigore leda nyomon begi gyudi ge zewe gyudi kharasne ane tenzin mari padire se nga sibe nga sosora nga la mine nga temba tuba chime tenzin mari padi da nga zo nyomon ge zaware jesa nga zo dunga yu gyudi zo de telatine gore je adi diche da dunga meba se de da na nga zo digi duya ya dunga de tene meba se je ane nga zo digi 폰숨 촉바티기 하고 주야라 안에 가르고 고리라네 지사 녀몬 바티게 빵고 고레스 지사 동아 영역이 균녀몬 바티 빵바이나 되네 녀몬 바 동아 용 말에 지사 디마야네 디 도초 디기 용 고레스 지사다 녀몬 빵와서 녀몬 바 빵야기 빵야라 녀몬 바 준세게 저 제위 뒤디가레스네 다 다세 말이 바데와 가서 다세 말이 된지 nga라 미네 nga tempo bachi be 된지 말이 바레스 디방고레스 디가네스 방그레람나 동방이 또별로 제바체 동방이 또별로 공발레데네 안디 방투그레스 지난디네 자다 마제 동방이 또별로 공제 템바주바지베 텐진데 방바이나 아니 디 녀모바케요 말에 데 녀모바케면 네네 레사야 마 레앙바사요 마 디메나 너 코발레케요 말레스 지난 코발레 탈고레스 지난 녀모바 방비 방바디 톱선은 코와라 탈베 탈바세 두고를 해야지. 아기징아도 엔디고 시로하다.
Good evening. A couple of weeks ago, in our last weekend of classes, we looked at how all the suffering experiences we encounter come about independent on causes. Likewise with happiness. Happiness, like suffering, is a result that comes about independent on causes. And the reason why we experience all forms of suffering, whether that be of physical pain or mental discomfort or any of the other ways of dividing suffering, is because we have these contaminated physical and mental aggregates. And these contaminated aggregates have also come about independent on causes. And they have as their root cause the ignorance of self-grasping. And last time we looked at this process in some detail, seeing how karma is ripened at the time of death by afflictions such as of craving and grasping. Karma is not only ripened at the time of death by afflictions, but is also accumulated continuously throughout our lives by afflictions. Afflictions themselves are therefore not only the cause that leads to the accumulation or ripening of karma, but afflictions are also a result in that they follow from improper mental engagement. Improper mental engagement, this too has a specific place in this sequence of events. It precedes the rise of the afflictions, but it follows from an ignorance of self-grasping. And last time then we looked at how at this process. And the importance of recognizing this is that when we realize that suffering is a result coming about in dependence on causes, as is happiness, we recognize then that it's through accumulating the causes for happiness, we will experience happiness. And it's through identifying and then eradicating the causes that would otherwise lead to suffering, we can gain freedom from suffering. This then is the great benefit that comes from clearly recognizing the sequence. Then we turn our mind to, if the root cause of all suffering is the ignorance of self-grasping, how do we abandon it? And this is through the cultivation of the wisdom realizing emptiness. The wisdom realizing emptiness is the actual or the direct antidote to the ignorance of self-grasping. When, to the extent that one cultivates the wisdom that realizes emptiness, one weakens the ignorance of self-grasping until one eradicates it completely. And when the root cause, the ignorance of self-grasping is eradicated, all the resulting or following steps, now I forget the word. Okay, then the afflictions, they too are eradicated. The improper mental engagement, that's right. That doesn't arise, nor too do the resulting afflictions, nor too is contaminated karma ripened, nor accumulated. Recognizing that then, a strength of mind arises, realizing or understanding that through applying oneself, freedom really is possible.
That dinma kisin shiva nachire, that dinma she sumba taro said in it, six shesara. That one you juba said, one you juba, Tomene, you manove, Rawan at the name of Batams.
That then was a brief recap of what we looked at last weekend. So now turning immediately to the text, coming to a new outline on page 7, the two truths. First sentence then. And just to say in the translation, as entity and essence are synonymous, in a couple of cases, in 3 cases, I've changed entity to essence. I just now prefer it. Establishment by way of its own essence has never been validly known to exist. Therefore, it is impossible for there to be any phenomenon that exists through its own power. Just a reminder, this first term, establishment by way of its own essence. In the Prasangika system, which is what this text is composed about, established by way of its own essence is synonymous with truly existent or truly established, and synonymous with established by way of its own defining characteristics, as well as inherently existent. These are all synonymous according to Prasangika. And what do they then all mean? They all mean that the phenomenon appears to be unchanging as well as independent. Independent in the sense that causes or parts or imputation is not required. It is existent by way of its own characteristics, its own nature, self-existent or existent by way of its own essence. That is the meaning, and these terms are all synonymous. Established by way of its own essence has never been validly known to exist. Here we understand that no phenomenon in the past has ever been validly found or correctly found to exist by way of its own essence, its own entity. No such phenomenon has ever, since beginningless time up to now, been found. Right now, no meditator is establishing or finding such an object. And in the future, no phenomenon will ever be found either that exists by way of its own nature or being self-existent. No such phenomenon across the 3 times has ever been found to exist.
And that Kangbo Mahopana Digala Kangbo Yore says Geshe Yorwada, this would dinner Yorba. Dinner Yorde, Rangang when you Juba, Kala Matiopa, pa sha sam mayin ba korong ngone drup de ba di an dina shin zao yin yo ma ye ma yo re da yo ma se dine ti zao yin ma des sigurda.
Certainly in the world, there are things that in the past existed and these days no longer do. Many species have gone extinct, for example, or areas of the world that were previously uninhabited by humans now are uninhabited by humans. Or a particular house for a while may be uninhabited by humans, empty of people, but then someone moves in and it's no longer empty of people. So certainly in our world, there are things that once existed and now don't, as well as things that currently don't exist but will in the future. But in terms of true existence, there's never been a phenomenon that has existed by way of its own nature, or right now is existing truly, or will ever exist by way of its own essence. No such phenomenon has ever or will ever exist.
Esa dine zaze nganzo nga sedi gala ye ma de ba pa lue sha ba la ma de rang ngwe ne drup de ba de thoma ni ne me ba re da de me ba re ma ba na yo ya ba re yin na nga zo lo le dine ji yo ba nan go re na wa na xin nga zo lo han je la nga sing dine nga ra xin du ba zin ba chung go re chi san di zin ba de nga zu nyom mo ji gyung ne de zai yu gyu di re sa ke sing xie de di re da.
That being said, though, our I, our sense of self, this does appear to us as truly existent. It spontaneously appears to us as if it is independent, not requiring causes or parts or imputation to exist. And it has been doing so, it is doing so, and as things are, it will continue to do so, continue to appear to us to exist by way of its own essence. And similarly, in the past, in the present, and in the future, we grasp at the self as existing in the way that it appears. We grasp at the self as being truly existent, despite it not existing in this way. And this is the root cause of all our suffering.
Dene rangwang me ba, rangwang wa tene me es. Chesang anzo rangwang se de tene yo ma re se de, rangwang wa tene yo ma re se de. Xian la ma due ba korong wen ne zhup due ba de, due tu ye de zao yin yo ma re se wo. Xian ji le, xian da, lui pa, xia ba zi le, ma due ba jia, korong wen ne, jige, ne ba dang, jie dang, zhou wang jie dang, dene se de zao yin yo ma re se. Rangwang yo ma, dene chi yo ma re se. Rangwang wa se de yo ma re se wo.
And the sentence concludes, it is impossible for there to be any phenomenon that exists through its own power. This then is just concluding the point that's being made in the first half of the sentence. So there has never, and there could never be, because of it being impossible for something to exist that is not dependent on imputation. No such thing has ever, is ever, or will ever existed. It is not possible.
Zanda Rangwang said, Rangwang said, Denic in Yomares, Rang la Wang the Wang Chet Yomares, Rang la Wang Chet Yomares, the Zanga Jidina, Manzuki, Jida Jidina, Tanga Rangwa, Geshe, Rangwa, Manzuki, and Dig, Lagale, Rangwa, Zemo, Rangwa, and next year, Duschen, Rangwa Yore said, top down Rangwa said, the Nigi Rangwa said, She Yorba.
Let's look at this term that concludes the sentence, own power. So own power is the literal Tibetan, rang and wang. So these are own and power. The two words together, though, are usually, almost always, when they're not translated literally, mean freedom. So understand it then in these two ways. So literally, or usually the word means freedom, literally it is own power. So now to translate what Genna said, in the world, ordinary people, everybody, longs for freedom, longs to have, longs to be free and to have freedom.
다 왕시대 그런게 가르치기 직지하기 그런 되바나 제기 때 그런라 왕체도 여바나 랑왕 제기 제발라 델야 가이킨 바시 매바나 제디다 그랑와시로 와 제기 제발 소소게 랑서 소소라는 게 제 되바이나 현지의 가제 안제 추고 말해서 가좀 제바네 다 랑왕 매바시로 와 랑왕 매바 비나로 줄래 나서 칠로 봐 참참 좋아다 지요르데 이나다 베네 나서 님 진보 끼엔지도 나로 되고 칠로 조시고 말해서 흉기 팀당 가샤반자 나서 참참 좋아야 랑왕데 수가 봐라 봐다 가지 제가 딩아서 좋아하게 랑왕세요 말대가서 그래서 고가고로 봐 디나싱아서 랑왕세디 베나서 지금 꾸마꾸야세디 다디 소소 꾸마꾸에 꾸에나다 흉기 팀다 되네게 진짜 꾸추고 말해서 가좀 제대로 다디 꾸마꾸에 랑왕세디 가고 랑왕 가고로 봐 제산데 나가 저기 현기 가좀 매바제 아니 바 대제발라 바르시 낑행기 베데 낑지기 마가바제 제투제 되라서 랑왕시그로 와다가서 지다 지된다 랑왕기시에들라 랑기 직제라 현지기 김체 현지기 바 마가바이나 제들라 랑왕시그로 와다가서 지딘바나 랑왕세 비슷한 되는 실 비슷한 거로 와
People, not only do people, ordinary people, long for freedom, but they have the view that they are free. Now, to relate this terminology, free or freedom, back to the literal own power, the impression is that they are under, people generally think they have power over themselves, or we'd probably say autonomy. And it's only when there is an external obstacle that impedes them is freedom lost. For example, people generally feel they have freedom to go where they want, but then sometimes the government says, no, you have to stay at home, you're all in lockdown, and now one's freedom has been impeded. So this is generally how someone thinks. Or if someone commits a crime and they are imprisoned, they lack freedom because they now have been imprisoned. So this generally is how we understand freedom, or being under one's own power, or being autonomous.
다다가 저기 될이야 흉나라 랑왕띠네 요마레서 셰디 랑왕세 랑세디 당아 저기 뭐보가는 최간의 신네 딜로 랑세디 고라 베네 뭐보이는 뭐보코롱 딱바이나 가리는 최가리나 랑세디 인지미지 강사를 고고 말아 먼저 지딘나 셰디 랑와 요르 요마세디 강 파시베지 강사를 랑와 유세디 강사 고용으로 당아 중국법 강다 강이 있네야 랑왕 요마르세 현지라 되는 마도 현지라 마되바디 되두고 말해서 네 요마르세 현지라 마되바 취지 용하 요마르세 매와서 랑왕 매바래서 근데 가지고 유구로보다 된도가 가르쳐 기변에 그 규지라 되네 기글 마도 규지라 마되바 그 윤유구제 매로와 매와서 유구 되네 현 규지라 마되바 랑왕 요마르세지 요마르세로
In the context of the text, being under something being under its own control, or being free, freedom or autonomous, this would relate to any phenomenon, not just the person. And the meaning would be if something were under its own power or its own control, or if it were free or autonomous, it would not be dependent on something else. It wouldn't require causes or conditions. It would be able to function under its own control, its own power. It would then be free because it wouldn't require the influence of something other than itself. So, for example, for a plant to grow, it would require no seed or other conditions at all. if it were under its own control, if it had freedom to grow. But there is no such thing that has such freedom or is under its own control.
anga chung je digin la ya kinyo mar kho ti sewe chela ko rang me ba kho cher ru ro khas kas ko gyudan jin ji cho yong du di gyudan jin di chasang tunyin chasang zom yong du ko ya ji yong de rang yo ma ge yong ro cher ru go re de ne du chene ka bene yu saban dang ne de chu da lu da zhe da chasang tunyin zom ba chasang zom yong du 아니 델레 뉴지 연구래. 다 튠진 직 맞은 바나 차상 좀 두면 뉴지가 말. 디나신 나 가서 수부대네 가서 유단 진기 또비 야 chercherugo. chercherugo 봐. 제가 디네자 다 디네 두고요 봐자. 다 저기 녀모제 세디야. 야 녀모제 주 그냥 가서 되샤로 시계변에 되샤수 계획이 주 유 미비 유당 데네 미비 두데 유데라 미비게 안에 가서 취미 이지에서다 네 제위 주 된지 말이 봐야지 제위 주 된지 말이 봐세 데네 메도 질비네 차과 제발 담바 메도 미치 메도 거로 유 메도데 거래 데네 메도 들미비 취미 이지기 로치게 다디 메도 여봐제 메도 데다 미비 취미 이지기로 여봐제 니처럼 좀여도 메도 데라 차베 차와기 연구래 메도드 통보에 미비 메도 줘봐이네 메도 될 미비 취미 이제 로드마게 바네 되샤기 말해 그래서 규칙 선거 말해 제사다 메도 될 미비 되샤게 유 안에 메도 유 메도 되체 메도 될 미비 취미 이제 로지 차상 창바이나 되고 될야 바시 땅에 각자 셈어 주바이나 되고 되샤기 용으로现在让没了，现在有的那厂里头留下计划了，留下计划的了，计划的了，有的那厂呢，给了的计划，现在留下的有了对的计划，现在可能有了嘛对吧？留下是计划要嘛的是，现在的可能让有吧呢，现在了嘛对吧？可能有吧呢留下的呢，有没那样留下计划计划的要嘛的，现在留下可能让没是的，可能计划的。居然见了对的用过了嘛？对，居然见了嘛？对吧？对下去用嘛来说。
If we think of how ourselves and all others we know came into this world, first they were conceived, then they were born, and then they grew up. It's quite clear this whole process is dependent on a variety of causes and conditions coming together well. So when you think of it like that whole process at no point is the being under their own power, but they are under the control or influence of what's around them, of other causes and conditions, and therefore has no freedom. The fetus, nor the infant, nor the young child has any control over whether they grow or not. The causes are accumulated and the required conditions are there, they will grow up. If any of the conditions are missing, then there's an impediment and something different may happen. And this too, though, shows that there is no self-control, or there's not under one's own power, one doesn't have freedom. The causes and conditions are required for growth to come about. Then let's use the same illustration as we used last time. The person sees a flower. So from how the consciousness works, there's an ignorance of self-grasping, the root cause of all our suffering, followed by improper mental engagement. So the flower now, the qualities of the flower are now exaggerated, and therefore attachment for the flower arises. If, for example, improper mental engagement didn't arise in relation to the flower, there would not be attachment for the flower. But if that cause, improper mental engagement, is there, attachment will arise. What we see here then is in this thought process, that person is not under their own power, or they don't have freedom. They are under the power of something else, namely causes and conditions. The arisal of attachment is not something that the person has control over. It comes about in dependence on causes and conditions. There is an object, a flower, there's improper mental engagement, and preceding that there is self-grasping, and therefore there's attachment. The person is not free. The person is not under their own power, but under the power or the influence of other, namely causes and conditions.
Janju Sem Roj Kiaway, Nassim Tamju, and the Sanyo Koban Tower, Jego to Sembege, and Janju Sim to Kiabalayan, the Janju Sim Dia, good and Kin, Shanchilla, do the model, Shanchilla Matioba Horon, Janju Sim Kituya Yomare, Mevaza, you got to go was Dambo, Dunga in Navi, Sim Chen Tongo, Dunga How, Dunga Tongo, Dunga Moshevacha, Dunga Tong. Then Sosu Dungadi. Dunga Ganga Imba, Sosu, Sovi Tone, Nyamyot, Dungadi, Dungagi, Rashi Imba, Haguache. Then Shen Semjendiki, the Ganga Yuba, the Ton, Dunga Neve Semja Tongo, Dunga Neve Semja Maton, and the Sangieta, Janju Sembale, Sangela Miji, Niji to Yamar, or Dunga Merva. Cesar Dineza, Dunga Neve, you, Dunga Neve Semja Tong. Then the Dunga Nave Semja Tong, the Dunga Rajan Ganga Yuba, the Sosuga Hako. Chesada, Semjen Diche, Deva Debari, Dunga Miduba Imbadi, Niso Hago, and Dene Hago, Latine, and Semjen Dunga the Jahudu, Sempiki, Samlo di Pa, Shukchimuki, and the Garza, dinner Rameba, or that did Dunga Tawa, the Niche would Sempiki, some Leadu, Chesada, Najala, Sanyo Topsho, Sanja Topna, that Semji Dunga Siala. Pando Yakshu Chetu in the San Yerisha, San Yoko, Toku to Sembe, somebody, the nation Leon Guru, Janju Sem, the Judan Kin, Jambada, Nijela Soba, Matemba, Janju Sem Rawan Kia Yomar, Janju Sem, Rawan Yomar, Judan Yen, then Kiore, Judan Yen, then Kiava Research, the Rawan Yomar said, Chesna, called Shangela, Dunion Gore Research.
Similarly, with the generation of bodhicitta, this is not something that one is under one's own control or one has freedom over. Why? Because it is dependent, the generation of bodhicitta is dependent on the accumulation of the appropriate causes. And the appropriate causes then, firstly, primarily start with recognizing the sufferings of samsara. First on an intellectual basis, gathering knowledge, reflecting on it, and then transforming this intellectual knowledge into coming to realize the sufferings of samsara, not merely intellectually, but based on one's own experience. Then, with those causes accumulated, one is ready to accumulate further causes and take this realization of the sufferings of samsara that has been gained in relation to one's own experience and relate it to others, recognizing how we are no different. They long for freedom from pain and misery, but they are suffering, bound in samsara in the same way as we are. Independence then on that cause, compassion will naturally arise, wanting others to be freed of such suffering, in the same way that we want to be freed from suffering. And independence on cultivating compassion ever further, the wish will arise within us, or the strength of mind rather, the determination that I take it on as my personal responsibility to ensure that each being attains freedom from suffering. And to do so, I must become a Buddha, the most skilled of guides. And in this way, bodhicitta arises. So this is a whole sequence of causes that need to be accumulated. It cannot just be wished. It's not under its own power, but it comes about in dependence on causes and conditions. In other words, it's other-powered rather than self-powered. So therefore here too, one can say that one has no freedom over the generation of bodhicitta, because bodhicitta comes about in dependence on other causes that are other than oneself. And to express it differently, bodhicitta comes about in dependence on causes, not one's own self-power. Or again, self-power, or one doesn't have freedom over it. One has to accumulate the appropriate causes.
Dondala Rawan Tine Yomare la du Shenji la Dubama, the Maduba de Zawak Yomare. Just a Rawan Yuba in the Caragors and Demper Trupor, Tigvarda, Rawan Yuna Ganesio, Shenji la Maduba. You change Yuna, may change la Madu Yutubachilla, Yunguna, Rawan Yobare, Shenji la Maduba, Penny Nuguru, good and Kim Mena or Kidubaina, Rawan Yedu, Chegoroja. Denigi, Rawan said Rawan Yuna, Demper Juba Yobor. Rangwa, Dembo Juba, Moin Yutuba, Rashing Juba said that the Jiba child, don't the Jiba this Shasa, Sick Tanya Jutan.
Returning to the sentence, it is impossible for there to be any phenomenon that exists through its own power. So what does it mean that something doesn't exist through its own power? Again, the literal Tibetan is, it will exist through other power, a power other than itself, or an influence other than, it's influenced by something other than itself. Which means, if it doesn't exist through its own power, it is because it exists independent on causes and conditions. What would it mean if something existed by way of its own power? It would mean it's not dependent. It wouldn't require causes, because it itself would create its existence. It wouldn't need causes. For example, if a sprout had freedom, it was under its own power, it wouldn't require causes and conditions for the sprout to come into existence or to grow. And what would that mean? Not requiring causes, to being independent of causes. And something being independent of causes, independent of imputation, independent of parts, would be something truly existent. So therefore, if something existing through its own power is synonymous with true existence, synonymous with being established or existent by way of its own essence, synonymous with established by way of its own characteristics, synonymous with established by way of its own nature or inherently existent. So all of these are synonymous, different ways of expressing what we have in the text, existing through its own power. Nothing ever has existed in this way. In fact, as the text says, it's impossible to do so. It's impossible for something to be truly existent through its own power, inherently existent, self-existent.
Da che kande chi ine ya rangu ngwe ne du manyo ares zao ine du manyo ares ya chi rangu ne du tong bare ma do rangu ne du ba zao ne yo ma re sa da rang wang ngwe xian ji la ma de ba gang lai ma do rangu ngwe ne rang wang wa se xian ji la ma de ba rang wang se de zao ine yo ma re xian ji la ma de ba rang wang se zai me che kande chi ne xian ji la de ne yo ma de ma de ba rang wang se zao ine me ba re sa chi Therefore,
again, all phenomena, without exception, have never existed by way of their own nature, by way of their own power. There's no phenomenon that ever has been or will be self-existent. There's no phenomenon that exists free of dependency, free of dependence on causes, parts, or imputation. No phenomena. All phenomena are empty of existing in this way, empty of being established by way of their own essence.
Karasana kanis yores ne di dongbe tenze zamti Panye Tamji, Java, Nyoye Jubi, Di Dombi, Dinde Zam Di, Panye Tamji, Nyoye Jubi, Dinde Zamji Yoba Yin Bies. Di Dombi.
What we've seen in the first half of the paragraph is that no phenomenon has ever existed truly. But that doesn't mean that phenomena don't exist at all. It doesn't mean that there's nothing that exists. It's just that phenomena do not exist by way of their own nature. Now, returning to the text, and the paragraph continues. Mere dependent arisings, which are empty, are established through the experience of their causing all forms of help and harm. Thus, mere dependent arisings do exist.
Na dongbi, tenze zam sidoje. Jisada, kanla ma dyoba rangwen ne duba zo me sida rangwa mebar, kanla ma dyoba mebar la yo da kanla ma dyoba rangwen ne duba dongbi dongbare, jeba chena dine dongsa ma do ya mares. Ina dongba dingane kariyo gansu yoresen, tenba zam yo shanla, tenba zam yo bares. Shanla tenne pa lue daba zam yo bar, tenba zam yo res. Shanla tenba zam yo bar, tenze zam se shanla tenne ane di yo bares.
Mere dependent arisings, which are empty. So phenomena arise dependently. They don't exist truly, but they rise dependently. They are mutually dependent.
Ane tenze zam dige karche osan shanla tenne zam yo ba, tenba zam yen tenne karche osan panye tamche jeba nyongye jubes. Tengara zu penba da nyoba shen chi la tenne pengyu yo ba da shen chi la tenne nygyu yo ba de ngara zu ya sebu nyongye hagu du wa so re.
And then the sentence then, I'll read the whole sentence. Mere dependent arisings, which are empty, are established through the experience of their causing all forms of help and harm. So this is how we come to recognize them, through our experience of phenomena, experiencing them through all forms of help and harm.
Panye tamje jeba nyongye jubese dangara jugi da panye gi tenne panye junya gi dele ya ane rakpa dang chamo dang mo yorwa dangara ju rakpa sam dang ngara ju rakpa ro sam nyong ngara ju sego hagu gorwa garesene panye tamje sirwa penba da nyoba pene ngara jugi chudi chakpa chagu yo bana 장모 지가를 뜬셔봐나 장모 디기 파 펜체네 추디 캬과 차투고래 딩한 저기 세부하고 거와 제산 추 변에 추리 캬과 고고에나 아주 배 장로 차감 날봐 주셔네 캬과 차로 그래 나디야서 공부가 있나 되네 추 칠월 봐 뜬셔봐네 장모 디기 고 캬과지 도도 차네 장모 디기 캬과 차길이 자기 여바데 핑기 여바데 아주 세부하고 거와 나 장모들의 착바들이야 거리 누고선 차와다나 차위기 죄디 누고로와 제산 착바로시나 착바 파 휴고고에 나가지고 차와 죄할 때 매한 매라당 되는지도 죄 님에 되셔반 착바 휴르고 제산 착바들이야 장위기 작자디기 핑기여 바다 차위에 자기 누비여 바디 난저기 세워하고도 그러나 베스베선 마서는
Mere dependent arisings, which are empty, are established through the experience of their causing all forms of help and harm. There are many degrees of subtlety to which one cannot understand this, but starting then with a straightforward illustration would be, in dependence on cold weather like this, water will freeze. And what then will harm this ice is the warmth of the morning sun, which will cause the ice then to melt. So in this way, we can see a clear illustration of dependency as well as come to understand the meaning of help and harm.
Delia, Sada, Chuda, Ludili, Chick Della Dene, and Nuki, but the Pingu, but as a Hawachine, Delia, Saya, Huluya, Chutayada, Luria, the Bejiche, I think as a Hawkurva. That Dene, Denegi, Shindi, and Gumeva, Kotsawa, Jeshavano, Gamji, Meva to you, I think as a Hawkur, just a Delia, never knew Meva, knew me, Mejashana, call a Nugu, but Hawajana could meet at Meva Suchak. Just a Denegi, Zangajugi, Penutiki, Hawkuro, and Dinashing Aranjugi, Lera Kanta kind, and Azu Lule, Dangazu Subulia, and the Kala Digi, Turguna, Subodila, Nazamaya, the Pingu, about some dodging of the Beji, Beji Tangore, just a Digi, Kala Dicta D7, Della Dine, Manzo, and Nazayunguana, Deepa Gath Chigura, Benaz, Dasadira. That the Nayam tea, and they got Subula Leva in Digi, Della Dine, Manso Nazada, Ganga, Mango Yunguyovaza, Deepa, and the Gagorwa. Just on Deepa Gaya de Patu, Yang Budea, Karab Gaya, Chichik Pat, Jeban, Nazi the Moga Della, Deniji Jebala Dine, and the Nazi the Gugo, Mogoba, and the Tablam Bijangor. Just something out to Muinizu, Young troops at the Ranzu, say what happened to the Chagorwa.
And other clear illustrations, or if one wants a plant to grow, then the dependency that will help this process, the accumulation of the conditions such as appropriate soil, moisture, and warmth. So these are causes that in dependence upon which it will help the result come about. And then what would harm it would be if the weather is, again, too cold, then the plant will be harmed and will die. Similarly, if one wants to stay healthy, to keep one's body healthy, one eats food that is nutritious, and if one has an allergy, one avoids food that one has an allergy to, otherwise one's body will be harmed. So similarly, there are particular causes that help bring about a result and others which will harm that result. Likewise, the situation with coronavirus, not wanting to get ill, then as a community, as well as individuals within that community, there are various courses of action that need to be taken so as to protect ourselves and protect others from harm. And this too is an illustration of dependency. That in dependence on accumulating particular causes, this will help bring about the desired result, and in dependence on accumulating other causes, that desired result will be harmed.
Nyoye druba drube ane dendre zamshi yoba yins. Chisa shenchi la dune tanga zuki deki siyada shenchi la dune drubi yongan. Deki siyada shenchi la dune yungu drubo wara yode bachi res. Dunga siyada shenchi la dune yode bachi res. Chisa choye kandashi na yoye siyada shenchi la dune dendre zamshi yoba yins. Shenchi la döba zamji yoba re mado shenchi la ma döba di yomar. Chisa shenchi la döba zamji dewasi na dungwasi na da chasa dinigi shenchi la döba zamji yoba re esi dendre zamshi yoba yins.
The sentence started with the three words, mere dependent arisings. Almost always the term mere you can understand through its synonyms of just or only. The meaning then here is that for a desired result, whether one wants to benefit oneself or others, or avoid harm for oneself or others, this will come about in dependence only on dependent arisings, or merely on dependent arisings. In other words, the accumulation of specific causes and conditions. Likewise, to achieve happiness, as well as to avoid suffering, this will come about in dependence on causes and conditions. Happiness is merely a dependent arising. what comes about only in dependence on causes and conditions.
야고라치 먼저 하모고 차이로 와지다 먼저 라바라바디 현실에 되는 주요바다 하고 되는 또 차위직디 예한주기 근데 현실에 되는 주요바디 하고 마토 완장아 주기 너저 쉬어야지 디쇼고로 봐 당아서 심주진데 뒤지기 최 차상이야 미 뒤지기 오버들이 민고란 샤왕라고 샤왕스 비슷다 제산 현 규단 kiến 지라 되바마도 마되바 요하면 샤와래다 다디네가도 진에 데네기 베네 유다 데네 제볼 뛰는 연구에서도 심지체제가 지도 대고 델레 심지대 뛰어봐야 차차차로도 당아서 믿어봐 세디 세상 안저 가르레 뛰네 끼와서 아말레 뛰네 끼와래 사자 다도 아말 뛰네 끼와서 라과르와 다디마 차차차 삼단 당아주기 다에 아주 체체 줘야 돼. 끼지끼지끼지끼지 규어 주고 그러다. 도시에 라과 가서 차차차 하고 그러. 진짜 끼지마 세야 믿다 봐. 세야 무연이 수디게 하고 두고 봐. 진짜 내내게 땡진 저와 준비 땡 직된에 봐. 참모참모도 하고 두도 땡지 남샤디게 아주게 나도 전에든 도시에 돼. 다 가sam질 파 심주 제바 제는 땡진 대화 줘야 되다. 땡진 저와 중앙 제제요도 최가대시나 파르에 다바점 파르에 샤바점 제바하고요도 강라이마도 르 샤바메 랑원의 주바디 미도 선배기를 두고 대디 하고 두변한 저기 최근 우인의 수디 지메 지진다 하고 다다 하고 두고라 니 하고 두발을 때네 디냠는 제나 단 뉴바디야 로 컴퓨터 슈셔시 다도 당한 저기 산지고가 토야다 탈벽고가 토야야 디 두고라 다당한 저기 The Rapa 하고 그러마다 참모된 가서 하모고 내기엔자 니기가 줄이야 지금 하디로와
The three illustrations I've given thus far are easy to understand, and in your meditation start with such illustrations and then take it to subtler levels, because the subtler levels will only understanding of them will only come about through receiving more teachings and reflecting ever more on them. So all functioning things or impermanent phenomena, things that change momentarily, are other-powered, as opposed to under their own power, with the meaning of being other-powered, that they are influenced by things other than themselves, namely causes and conditions. So another way to express that is everything that changes momentarily is dependent on causes and conditions. So here one can reflect with one's knowledge of impermanence. So in a course level, we know that when a fetus has been conceived, that's a dependency, and its birth, the child's birth is dependent on the mum, and then its growing up will depend on many causes. So this was the coarser level that we looked at before, taking it to a subtler level. At every point of development, the phenomenon or the child is impermanent and therefore changes moment by moment. And it doesn't change momentarily under its own power, but in dependence on a variety of causes and conditions. And this entire process one can look at from the coarser level of the child down to a subtler level of its momentarily change that comes about in dependence on causes, and those causes themselves too are impermanent, and they too momentarily change, also in dependence on other causes and conditions. So in this way, in your reflections, you can take the reflection on dependency on causes and conditions to subtler levels. And in this way, one comes to understand how phenomena actually exist in reality. And this is important because we tend not to relate to phenomena as being impermanent. And when they show themselves as being such, we are surprised. And that's just on the coarsest level. But through repeated reflection, one can come to see how all impermanent phenomena change momentarily, And that change is, and because it changes momentarily, it does so in dependence on causes. Those causes are dependent arisings too. They also change momentarily and so forth. And as one reflects, repeatedly over a sustained period, one's wisdom develops and one's understanding of reality develops. And this then enables the attainment of Buddhahood to come ever closer.
Nāshīng sībī chē tham chē ngō nī chūpa tēne mē bē rāshīng dēgī yīng lē sām rāshīng dēgā lē mā dē bē ngā nē nā wā tēn chū nā sō sō chār bē ngāng sū dō yue bē shē jā tham chē lā ngō nī lē yue chīng sā.
Now looking at the next paragraph, all samsaric phenomena are not established by way of their own essence, but appear within the expanse of this completely non-existent nature. To express this differently, they appear without passing beyond from within the state of having just this nature.
지난 최영아들로 최간데 장아들로 나위게 나들로라 나디게 최간데 지여바이네야 신데 최간데 탐제 랑원의 주바세 자오기네 요 말이야사데 대시 랑원의 주바세 현실라 마되어봐 현실라 마되어봐 그런 줍디해 자오기네 매바레스 지난 매바자 디니기 제바 지디갑라 디니게 랑원의 기매바 나 강라에 마되어봐 뢰파 샤바 잠라 마되어 랑원의 주바디 동바레스 되게 rāshīn dīng, dīgī yīng sīrī, tōngbē tōngsāng jīmā dīyō mā rē sīrī yīng sīrī.
Looking at the first sentence then, all samsaric phenomena are not established by way of their own essence, but appear within the expanse of this completely non-existent nature. So let's divide the sentence into two parts. The first part, we've heard now many times, all samsaric phenomena are not established by way of their own essence. Every phenomenon, every object of thought, every phenomenon that appears to our mind, despite appearing to exist by way of its own essence, does not exist in this way. And that does not exist in this way is the meaning then of the second part of the sentence. But appear within the expanse of this completely non-existent nature. So this is a different way of expressing, again, what we've heard many times before. Everything that appears to us appears to be existent or self-existent, or established by way of its own essence, or not dependent at all. But no phenomenon has ever existed in this way. No phenomenon has ever existed by way of its own nature, despite appearing as such. Rather, the phenomenon is empty of existing in the way that appears. The phenomena is empty of true existence. So that then, the phenomenon being empty of existing in the way that it appears, empty of true existence, is the meaning of the second part of the sentence, which is expressed quite differently from how we usually hear it, but appear within the expanse of this completely non-existent nature. In other words, the phenomenon arise because they are empty of inherent existence. They do not exist truly.
가시한실라 마되어봐 강라에 마되어 랑원에 두바 두에민도 제바치도 데니게 제바치도 갈라 랑원에 절마 랑원에 두바 자기네메 매되겐 칠라 동상 질시우라 인세 동상지 데 동상 동이르와 랑원에 두베 동베게 동상들의 민 인세도 다시 인세도 동이르 고고와.
This way of expressing here the expanse of this completely non-existent nature is a different way, perhaps a more poetic way of saying emptiness. When one investigates whether the phenomenon exists in the way that it appears, which is, as we see in the first part of the sentence, it appears as being established by way of its own essence. One investigates and finds the phenomenon doesn't exist by way of its own essence, but is rather empty of existing by way of its own essence. One realizes emptiness. And emptiness is the meaning of the second part of the sentence, the expanse of this completely non-existent nature.
Rashin degi ngale madi bingane sirota. Rashin degi ngale madi bingane siru. Rashin tongsang jimba dagarang che madi balane dagara neba sirota. Tongsang jimba di ngala tongsang ngala da nawa tenjung shen chila chikle tene ane nasosu che nasosu shagores chagores. 나소도 차유에 나서 되니기 현실에 되네 나소도 샤용의 최지 연구를 했어야 돼. 나소도 나소도 예배했어야 돼. 라신 대개 안에 마디빙 안에 나와 진주 나소도 차위 나소도 예배했어야 돼.
And continuing in the text, and again let's read a little further than he's covered already. To express this differently, they appear without passing beyond from within this state of having just this nature. So again, this is a different way of expressing what was just covered in the first sentence. So that first sentence then has been explained in the way that it's usually presented. So the words here are quite different from what we're used to hearing, but the meaning is that all phenomena appear as being self-existent or truly existent, but when we investigate, we realize they do not exist in this way. They are empty of true existence. So that has now just been expressed in two different ways. Then the paragraph continues over the page, and again, I read half of the sentence, so I'll just have to check where he read up to. And again, I read on. Since the innumerable varieties of dependent arisings appear whilst existing in this their natural state.
Na dandala karasungorasene chue kane chine ko ngā zu lō la nā yō tū kāng lā yā mā tō bā, kāng lā yā mā tō rāng ngō nī tū bā nā ngō rō bā nā wā nā shīn chīk jē bā chē chē, tēnī tū yā sām chī jē bā chē bā yī nā nā wā nā shīn chīk tsā wā kī nī mē tīng jē bā chē tō kāng lā yā jē mā tō bā rāng wā tsā wā kī nī mē tōng sāng chī lī gō rē chē rē, tōng sāng chī lī gō rē sā sī tāng kōng jē bā ngō chē tī kō rāng jē bā chē nā wā nā shū mē jē bā chē nā tōng sāng chī yīn bā lā ngō, tōng sāng chī yīn bā lā 이나 현실에 되네 아니 자와 나소 드라마도 연구를 나소 받지 연구를 로래야 샤야다 먼저 자와 지야 돼 나소 연구를 해야 돼.
Since the innumerable varieties of dependent arisings appear whilst existing in this their natural state. Again, this is a different way of expressing what we've heard before. All phenomena appear to everything that we think of, everything that appears to mind, appears as if it is established by way of its own essence. The innumerable varieties, so there's any phenomenon, it appears to consciousness as being established or existing by way of its own essence. But when one investigates, one cannot find the essence of that object. One cannot find the essence that seems to establish the object. Or if you use the synonym of natural existence or inherent existence, one cannot find the nature of the object that seems to establish the object, by which the object exists, nothing like that is found. Rather, the object is found to be empty of existing in the way that it appears. So this then is the meaning here, or part of the meaning. Everything that appears to be truly existent, but when one investigates, it's found to be empty of true existence. Yet, phenomena still appear. Despite being empty of true existence, phenomena still appear. How? As dependent arisings, independence on other. And that then is the full meaning. Since the innumerable varieties of dependent arisings appear whilst existing in this their natural state.
Gyudan Genji Chondo Sabun Corona Dine Sabin Corongodi Java Chena Dongsan Red Dongsan Chagi de Ina that Gentile Dembala Dine and Nuge the Nuge Ya Charge Dongbocha ne Medosha ne Jevota then Jevuding on the Mizu Gochesa Nazolon Jeda Diniga Sabun Chibu Sombana Dush in the Sabin Corongo Rangungone Matubare Ina Gyudan Jin Shanla Dune, Koroya, number Mambu Gurche, and they call Metochi Dongbo Loma Shaya, Dongbo Chaya, Loma Kia, Meto Shaya, then Devotaya, and then Denigi Naso Jungore, Esirwada, Nazu Saban Double Chamber, Nedine, Nazu Mille Darawada, Mille Shaban, Miss setting, said Garatus, Daxin Jibe Sena. Meeting, Dongsan Imbala, Dini, Shenche, Dongsan Imbala, in a Tongba Ding and War Tongba Indaya, Tianjin, Dewa Jebalatin, Tianjin, Shenche, Debalatine, Paso Draw, Drew, Jeba, Drew, Java Cheba, Geshe Java Cheba, Kalada, Dini Lagi Java Cheba, Jawan Shenle, Pember Drubia, Java Drubia, Shenle Nubia, Java Drubia, Jawana Drubia, Dini Unguas, Jeza, Nazuki, Mo Rashi Matubare. In a Kono Dinjin Joshua, Dongba is a Shenla Matubarang, Kala Matubarang when you do Tonga Inza, Karchagre, Shenla Duba Chagova. Shenla Duba Inza, Duba Delatine, then not so young good as it. Lome, Oh.
Just to hopefully make this clearer, we take a couple of illustrations. So if we take a seed of a plant, and we have a seed holding a seed in mind, and then how does it appear to us? It appears as if it exists by way of its own essence. In other words, there's something about it that makes it a seed. And then we investigate, so where within this seed can we find this essence that establishes it as a seed? And we find we can't find any such essence. It's empty of it being established by way of its own essence. Yet, that seed came into being. How so? In dependence on causes and conditions. Moreover, despite the seed being empty of being existent by way of its own essence, when that seed encounters specific conditions, it will grow, it will sprout and grow into a plant. Likewise, let's say it's a flower, for that flower to bloom, that flower requires further conditions to bloom. But the flower bud, when we now call that to mind, it too appears to have its own essence. There's an essence that makes it a flower bud. But when one investigates, one finds that is empty of inherent existence too. It's empty of its existing by way of its own essence. Nevertheless, we know when the sun rises, that in dependence on that condition, the flower will bloom. And likewise, when one investigates the flower too, in the same way, we will see, despite appearing to exist in one way, it doesn't exist in this way, it's empty of existing in this way, yet because of being a dependent arising, it can function. The flower will then close in the evening, or perhaps wilt and die. And this is the same with all phenomena. So take the person, for example, the I or the self. One sees how it appears, one investigates and finds that there is no essence to the person. There isn't something that makes the self that characterizes the self. It is empty of being established by way of its own essence. It's empty. So here one realizes emptiness. But also, the person we know can function as a person, working, eating, thinking, and so forth. How so? Independence on causes, independence on paths, independence on imputation. So therefore, phenomena, despite appearing in a particular way, they are empty of existing in that way. They do not exist in that way, but yet they can function. How so? As dependent arisings. Let me just, for clarity, so phenomena, or I'm just going to re-express the last sentence. Phenomena appear in a particular way, but when we investigate, we see they do not exist in this way, they are empty of existing in this way, yet they do exist. How so? As dependent arisings. Dependence on causes, parts, and imputation, they exist in this way and can function in this way. Over many years, His Holiness has collaborated with scientists, and they've investigated form to try and find its essence, the essence of form in general or a particular object, to try and find its essence that establishes it, or the essence by which it exists. And no such essence in any object has been found at all. Rather, it's been found that the object, or form in general, is empty of being established by way of its own essence, or its own nature.
Sheja Chue condition Dasan Jibi Cena Rango Wene Maduba Dombi Donsang Chiche. Dang Rango Wene Maduba, Shenjila Madu Rang Wene Duba the Meva and Zang, Nika Shenjil Dubare, Shenjil Dune Yubare, Shenjil Dune, Jawana Sujeva, Ni Yuba and Zang, Sheja Tamjela, Ngo Niri Yu, Silwa, Sheja Tamjela, Ngo Niri Yujing, the Chue condition and Delia, Ngo Ranshingi Maduba, Tembaduba. Den Dongba is the Donna de Basachida, and Tianqin Jawa Jumbi, and Tianqin Jawa Jungwa said the Kunzubi, Moni Yungres, Koranshin, Dasan Jibi Chena, Galama Rangun to be Donsan Chiche, Donsan or Chichagore. That Galama to Rangun to be Dongba in Zang, and got a Tian body, Tianqin Jawa, she's a Tianqin Jawa Jungwa Yoba, Kunzuba, Chesang Moni, Galama to Donsan or Chida. And the Tianqin, Jawa Jui, Dene, Yobashi, Niyungurese, more Niyungurese. And more Yujing said about it.
What I've just presented then is, we first see how the phenomenon, whatever it is, whether it's a seed, the sprouting plant, the flower, the blossom, the bud, the flower, or even a person, we see how it appears to the mind. We investigate to see if it exists in the way that it appears, and we find that it's empty of being established by way of its own empty of being established by way of its own essence, and emptiness is realized. First part. But when one doesn't investigate, we know that the phenomenon can function in a particular way, and it exists in a particular way, just not in the way that it appears to consciousness. It exists as a dependent arising and can function because it is a dependent arising. The second part. That then, now the text then continues. All objects of knowledge have two entities. So of these, so we've now just mentioned the two entities. The first is where one sees how the phenomenon appears to consciousness, investigates and finds that it's empty of existing the way that it appears, and emptiness is realized. This is the ultimate truth. When one doesn't investigate, phenomena do exist, but not in the way that they appear to consciousness, but rather they exist as mere dependent arisings. This is the conventional truth. So when we hear, all objects of knowledge have two entities. Those two entities are, or those two essences are, ultimate truth and conventional truth.
And that Dulugi now so sin that now on I think I do Dasan Jibe Chena Gan Niema Donsanga Chinaja, Danso Donsai Naji, Dina the Dulugi now at easy. What Dulugi now to was you.
The text continues. One entity, that is its superficial way of appearing, and one entity, that is its deep way of appearing. All objects of knowledge have two entities. One entity that is its superficial way of appearing, and one entity that is its deep way of appearing. The superficial way of appearing is how phenomena appear, that phenomena are dependent on causes and conditions. So this is superficial or coarse. And we think of the flower, the person, appears in dependence on causes and conditions, exists in dependence on causes and conditions. So this superficial way of appearing is independence on causes and conditions. The deep way of appearing, or the deep way of being, which the deep way of being can also be expressed as we have here the deep way of existing. The deep way of being or the deep way of existing refers to when one investigates how the phenomenon appears and one comes to realize that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. That realization that it's empty of existing in the way that it appears is the deep way of being or the deep way of existing.
당한 저 다신 제바 강도 나와나 두물 제바 마제바제 지당아도 군주비 최 나던 탄이별로 체메디 다디 고 미래 고 지신레디 진짜라서 하고 체마 유리비 뭐시가 좀 뭐시로 디 미래 디 신레 디 메도레 디 칼라서 하고 디 탄이베 체메 유 하고야기 유 뭐직스로 디라 군주된 바서라 나 차기 나서 뭐직세 디 군주된 바 지사다 푸기세의 다신 집에 나와는 두 집아체네 가야 동상아 진예디 동바 동상 어디 푸기 뭐 직세로 어디로 내라민 돈단된 바라기 지사 다 군주 템바다 돈단된 바세야 되는 저게 대반이 있어야 돼 어디네 질라 그래서 땡이라
Continuing to look at these two entities, the one being the superficial and the one being the deep. A further way to understand this is the superficial way of existing is all conventional phenomena that we perceive, person, flower, and so forth. These are conventional truths. The deeper way of existing, the deeper way of being, which one comes to when one investigates and realizes emptiness, this is the ultimate truth. So therefore, when we say all objects of knowledge have two entities, one entity is the conventional truth, and one entity is the ultimate truth. All objects of knowledge have two entities. One entity that it is superficial way of appearing, and one entity that is its deep way of appearing. Then to express this a little differently, when one sees firstly how phenomena appear to us as truly existent, then investigates and comes to realize that all phenomena, without exception, are empty of existing truly, one realizes emptiness. This then is the deep way of being, the deep way that phenomena exist. This is how all phenomena exist at a deep level, and it is realized by emptiness. This is the ultimate truth. This deep way of being is the ultimate truth, or the deep way of existing is the ultimate truth. But that doesn't mean that phenomena don't exist at all. When one investigates and doesn't find them, and one realizes the ultimate truth, that doesn't mean that phenomena don't exist. Phenomena, whilst they do not exist in the way that they spontaneously appear to us as being truly existent, they do exist, though, as dependent arisings. Whether it's a flower or the person, they exist as dependent arisings. Dependence on causes, on parts, on imputation by mind. And this, then, is the superficial way of appearing. This is the conventional truth. The superficial way of appearing is the conventional truth. And phenomena appears superficially because they are dependent arisings.
Alright, I'm going to
We'll conclude here for tonight, but if you have some questions, then feel free to ask. Okay, then we'll conclude, and then, was there one here? No? Then we'll conclude here, and if there are questions tomorrow, there'll be time then. Thank you.